Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rom.
In our top story, the Jewish state mourned the loss of 6 hostages who were found murdered by Hamas in Gaza last week. The IDF believes that the terrorists executed the hostages to prevent them from being rescued by Israeli forces operating in the area. Thousands of Israelis attended funerals held for Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Eden Yerushalmi, Ori Danino, Alex Lobanov, Carmiel Gat, and Almog Sarusi. These 6 were kidnapped on October 7th and held hostage for more than 328 days before their bloodthirsty captors slaughtered them in the tunnels under Rafah. Their bodies were discovered less than a kilometer from where former hostage Farhan al-Qadi was rescued just days before. The IDF believes that the terrorists feared that al-Qadi had provided intelligence on where other hostages were being held and chose to execute them rather than allowing them to be freed. It is believed that 64 of the 251 hostages abducted by Hamas on October 7th are alive inside of Gaza. The IDF has confirmed the deaths of at least 33 hostages whose bodies are still held by the Iranian-backed terror group.
The administration of U.S. President Joe Biden is working to advance what is being called a take-it-or-leave-it ceasefire deal, warning that if the parties do not agree to the terms, America will walk away from the negotiations. The framework of the proposed agreement calls on Jerusalem to declare a ceasefire in Gaza and release terrorists from Israeli jails in exchange for the remaining living hostages and the bodies of those held by the Hamas terror group. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu noted that even a short withdrawal from the strategic Philadelphia corridor will allow Hamas to regroup and rearm, and Israel will not be able to secure the critical passageway between Gaza and Egypt again. He added that the execution of 6 hostages in Gaza by Hamas is proof that the Iranian-backed terror group is not interested in a deal. He said Israel has been holding intensive negotiations in a supreme effort to reach an agreement, but Hamas continues to refuse all proposals.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump is blaming the weak Biden administration for the execution of 6 Israeli hostages in Gaza last week. The presidential candidate released a statement saying, "We grieve the senseless death of the Israeli hostages, including a wonderful American citizen, Hirsch Goldberg Polin, murdered by Hamas due to a complete lack of American strength and leadership." He said, "Make no mistake, this happened because Comrade Kamala Harris and crooked Joe Biden are poor leaders." Former President Trump has said that if he was in office, Hamas and Iran never would have perpetrated the October 7th attacks on the Jewish state.
A group of U.S. Marines were attacked and nearly abducted by a crazed mob in Turkey. A video released by the anti-American Turkey Youth Union shows a violent mob beating 2 Marines. They placed bags over their heads while shouting, "Yankees go home." The Marines were saved by 5 other American soldiers who intervened before Turkish police arrived. The U.S. servicemen were stationed on an American warship, the USS Wasp, that had docked at the port of Izmir after concluding joint training exercises with Turkish naval forces.
The United Kingdom has announced the partial embargo of weapons exports to the Jewish state in protest of the war in Gaza. Spain, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands have already enforced full arms embargoes against Israel, and this move by the British government is seen as a capitulation to pressure by pro-Hamas groups to boycott the Jewish state. The government released a statement announcing the rejection of 30 Israeli arms export licenses, saying that it is concerned that British weapons and defense exports might be used in violation of international law in Gaza. The ban includes parts for aircraft, drones, helicopters, and artillery sites. The British Foreign Office noted that it is not imposing a ban on sales of F-35 parts for use by the Jewish state unless they are ordered directly by and exclusively for Israel. This marks a dramatic shift in policy from the previous conservative British government, and many have accused the Labour Party of caving to the anti-Israel boycott, divest, and sanction movement. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded, "This shameful decision will not change Israel's determination to defeat Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization that savagely murdered 1,200 people on October 7th, including 14 British citizens." He said instead of standing with Israel, a fellow democracy defending itself against barbarism, Britain's misguided decision will only embolden Hamas.
The United Nations Security Council has finally held formal discussions on the hostages taken from Israel by Hamas on October 7th. The meeting came at the insistence of Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon. He said it is a disgrace that it has taken the Council 11 months and the brutal execution of 6 hostages by Hamas terrorists to convene this discussion. Danon thanked representatives from the United States, the United Kingdom, and France for calling the meeting. The Israeli ambassador added that the Security Council must unequivocally condemn this Nazi-like Hamas terrorist organization and demand the immediate and unconditional release of all the hostages.
Vice President and current presidential candidate Kamala Harris has appointed an outspoken anti-Semite as her new Arab outreach director. Brenda Abdallah, an American lawyer of Egyptian descent, has accused Jews of controlling American politics on numerous occasions and has been openly critical of the Jewish state. Her appointment comes along with several other controversial characters in an attempt to garner the support of Arab Americans. The Jewish News Syndicate noted that the Harris campaign is working with advisors who are known for pressuring Israel and urging closer ties with Iran. Harris herself has made bold moves to solicit Arab American voters by distancing herself from Israel. In July, she boycotted Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech at the United States Capitol and even defended pro-Hamas protesters that wreaked havoc on college campuses throughout the United States. She told The Nation News magazine that protesters are showing exactly what the human emotion should be as a response to Gaza.
New York Representative Richie Torres has issued a scathing letter to the heads of U.S. air carriers over their decision to suspend flights to Israel. The appeal, sent to the CEOs of Delta, United, and American Airlines, called for restoring flights to Israel. The New York Democrat warned that not doing so is effectively boycotting the Jewish state. Torres said the American airline industry has arbitrarily and unilaterally imposed its own ban on travel to Israel independently of an order from the Federal Aviation Administration. He complained that it is one thing to temporarily suspend air travel to Israel on security grounds, but to unilaterally suspend flights until mid-2025, as American Airlines has done, has the effect of a boycott. He added that given the arbitrary length of the suspension, one could be forgiven for thinking that the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement had taken over the American aviation industry without anyone crying foul. Torres concluded by calling on every U.S. air carrier to restore travel to Israel and to operate based on FAA guidance to prevent the appearance and the substance of discrimination against the Jewish state.
Archaeologists in Jerusalem are celebrating the discovery of a rare First Temple-era stone seal during excavations at the southern wall. The emblem holds the depiction of a winged figure and is inscribed in Hebrew, stating that it belonged to Yehozar, the son of Hosheahu. Archaeologists hailed the seal as one of the most beautiful and exceptionally rare discoveries ever unearthed in ancient Jerusalem. Heritage Minister Rabbi Amihai Eliyahu praised the discovery, noting that it offers a glimpse into the Kingdom of Judah's history and its connections with surrounding cultures at the time. He said this remarkable find underscores Jerusalem's significance 2,700 years ago and brings us closer to understanding the past when the temple still stood.
More than 2.5 million Israeli students returned to school last week. The usual joyous occasion was marred by the ongoing war with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has forced the evacuation of more than 80,000 Israelis from their homes. Some 17,000 school-aged children are evacuees from northern Israel, requiring the government and educators to work overtime to provide a sense of normalcy for the displaced youth. Thousands of students whose parents are serving in the Israeli army also returned to schools where, in some cases, IDF soldiers substituted for teachers that are serving in the reserves. The Ministry of Education noted that the 2024 school year began with 535,000 youngsters in kindergartens, 1,074,000 elementary school pupils, 335,000 middle schoolers, and 514,000 high school students. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Dr. Dan Diker. He's the president of the Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs. Dan, thank you for being on the show.
Josh, thank you.
Tell our viewers a little about what is the Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs?
Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs, Josh, just renamed formally for many decades the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, is the only real foreign affairs center in Israel that strengthens Israel's security and enhances its safety by elevating its international status.
We're seeing a lot of pressure from the Biden administration to hold off, to go to a ceasefire, to not fight back. Why is that in the best interest of the United States of America?
That's a very good question. And then there's the way Israel and the Middle East see the Middle East, and there's the way the Biden administration sees itself right now in an election year, especially one in which the president has announced that he is not going to run for election again, and that I think the first time in it may be ever that they delivered, or perhaps Lyndon Johnson was the other case, but they delivered a vice presidential candidate without any kind of any kind of voting, any kind of primaries, any kind of formal consideration, and the United States therefore wants quiet. They want industrial quiet in Gaza. They want quiet in the north, as Hezbollah has been attacking Israel at Iran's behest every single day since the 8th of October in the north, the 7th of October in the south. The United States has, in this administration, has a profound interest in a ceasefire, in a minor, perhaps, deal, return of some hostages. It's not all the hostages, but they want quiet at any price, and unfortunately, the price is very heavy for Israel.
We see this as an American issue. We saw it at the RNC. We saw it at the DNC. Israelis speaking about what's happening here. This is obviously something that's important to America. Why?
The moms and dads of hostages appeared both at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee and Democratic National Convention in Chicago. It is an extraordinary development because it's strictly an American political event. But here we are have been in the midst of an international terrorist tragedy, a humanitarian catastrophe of 100 American men and women who were both murdered and injured, wounded, and kidnapped into the clutches of the ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas clause, and are currently Americans, many of them, at least 8 Americans, are currently in the hell of the Hamas dungeons deep under Gaza. And so this is an American issue. It's not just an Israeli issue. And I think that the American officials, both in the DNC and the Republican National Convention, were wise enough to bring the hostages because they understand that it's an American issue, and insofar as they support Israel. But I think that what you and I have talked about, that this is an American issue, and America should be leading an international campaign. 23 countries have citizens deep under the ground in the Gaza dungeons.
You know, we also talk about this quite a bit for the last 2 decades, maybe, that this isn't a war about territory or land for peace. It's a religious war. It's very clear. The war, the Muslims call this war the Al-Aqsa flood, the Temple Mount flood. Yet we call this war Operation Iron Sword. Why is the West missing this point that this is a religious war?
For many, many years, and I must admit that Israel bought into a misconception. In their desperation for peace, they fashioned what is and has been a religious ideological war of Islam, challenging the Judeo-Christian community worldwide, and specifically their desire, their commitment to destroy the one and only nation state of the Jewish people on their road to killing what Osama bin Laden called around 9/11 the Crusader Zionist Alliance. Christians are the Crusaders in their mind, and the Jews, of course, are interchanged with the Zionists. And this is their commitment. And we in Israel made a mistake in modeling this war as what they call the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It is not the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. That is a territorial war, as you mentioned, many people think, and it is a political problem, as many people misunderstand. But in fact, the 7th of October proved to everyone that this is a jihad. It is an Islamic religious war against Jews and Christians and our history and our common future.
Dan, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Josh, the critical issue right now is for our Christian brothers and sisters and our Jewish brothers and sisters, Zionists all, to come together as we've never come together before, because our Judeo-Christian history, our current state of affairs and our future hang in the balance. And our Christian family in the United States, the evangelical community particularly, at least 60 to 70 million strong, they can change the balance of what is happening now and make sure that every American, certainly the American administration, stands shoulder to shoulder with Israel unconditionally, pressuring the Hamas and the Islamist terrorists led by the villainous Iranian regime and their mullahs. And we know what their intentions are, and standing together, we can all defeat this evil among us.
Thank you, Dan, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now the truth from Zion.
In the complex and often fraught geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, Iran's relationship with Israel stands out as one of the most contentious. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the Iranian government has been one of Israel's most vocal and consistent adversaries, marked not only by harsh rhetoric and political maneuvering, but also by direct support for anti-Israel terror organizations. Despite this official stance, there exists a nuanced and often overlooked aspect of Iranian society, both within the country and among the diaspora, that harbors more sympathetic views toward Israel. Before the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran and Israel enjoyed a relatively friendly relationship. Under the rule of the Pahlavi dynasty, Iran was one of the few majority Muslim countries to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. This period saw collaboration in various sectors, including trade, military cooperation, and intelligence sharing. The Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, saw Israel as a key ally against Arab nationalism and a strategic partner in the volatile Middle East. This alliance was also bolstered by the presence of a significant Jewish community in Iran, which had deep roots in the country dating back over 2,500 years. These historical connections laid the groundwork for a cultural affinity that persisted even after the revolution severed all official ties between the two nations. For many Iranians, especially those with secular or moderate views, the pre-revolutionary period is remembered as a time of relative openness and progress, during which relations with Israel were just another aspect of Iran's broader engagement with the world. Social media has provided a space for Iranians to engage with global conversations and share their perspectives. The younger generation is more exposed to global cultures and ideas. Iranians and Israelis can be in touch directly regarding shared interest. These connections often serve to humanize the Israeli people and break down the barriers of mistrust and enmity that the Iranian regime has worked so hard to build. For many in the diaspora, especially those who fled Iran in the wake of the revolution or during the subsequent decades of political repression, Israel represents a counterpoint to the Ayatollah's extreme authoritarianism. They see Israel as a beacon of democracy and modernity in the Middle East, in stark contrast to the hardline theocratic rule in Iran. Furthermore, the Iranian diaspora's pro-Israel sentiment is also influenced by the experience of living in Western countries, where Israel is often viewed through the lens of shared democratic values and strategic alliances. Tehran's anti-Israel stance has become a defining feature of its foreign policy, with leaders regularly calling for the destruction of the Jewish state, while at the same time supporting groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis that are committed to Israel's annihilation. However, this narrative is not universally accepted within Iran. Among the general population, especially within the younger generations, there is growing disillusionment with the Ayatollah's focus on Israel as the primary enemy. Many Iranians question why their government invests so much energy and resources in opposing Israel, a country that is geographically distant and poses no direct threat to Iran, while domestic issues like economic mismanagement, corruption, and human rights abuses in the extreme Shiite country remain unaddressed. Despite the presence of pro-Israel sentiment among some Iranians, both within the country and in the diaspora, it remains a highly controversial and sensitive topic. Openly expressing support for Israel inside Iran can lead to severe repercussions, including imprisonment, harassment, and even execution. The Ayatollah's intolerance for dissent means that those who harbor pro-Israel views must do so quietly, often sharing their opinions only in trusted circles or on anonymous social media accounts.
The Iranian people are not the enemies of Israel. We are at war with the evil Iranian government. Once there is a regime change in Iran, peace between the two countries will be possible.
Pro-Israel sentiment among Iranians, both within the country and in the diaspora, is a multifaceted phenomenon rooted in historical ties, cultural affinities, opposition to the Iranian regime, and the influence of globalization and social media. It reflects a broader undercurrent of resistance to the regime's ideological dominance and a desire for a more open and democratic Iran. As the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East continues to evolve, the voices of pro-Israel Iranians, though often muted, will remain an important part of the conversation about the future of Iran and its place in the world. Up next, the ICJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Today we're excited to be in Migdal HaEmek in the north of Israel, and what we're going to see today is the opening of a new home that's going to be assisting people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. The ICJ has been privileged to help with the establishment of this beautiful home, and we're here to bless it as the people begin to come.
I will tell you just a bit about this house, and first of all, thank you very much for your generous donation and help us to open that place. It was needed before the war, and it was started to establish before the war, and the war is coming, and now the needs is like here, really. We have 3 psychologists with different fields, like most about the trauma, most about EMDR, stuff like that. We have amazing crew of instructors that living here 24/7 and making all the non-formal relationship treatment, which is how to find the balance again, how to find the safe place again.
Since 1980, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has been a voice of Christian support for Israel and connected the global church to the land of the Bible. Headquartered in Jerusalem, the ICEJ has taken action to stand with Israel by caring for Holocaust survivors, helping Jewish families return home to Israel, providing bomb shelters, fighting anti-Semitism around the world, and by inviting Christians to discover Israel for themselves.
First of all, we are extremely privileged to be here today. Your nation deserves to live in peace and security, and
Amen.
we hope soon houses like that will not be needed anymore. But right now, we do everything to enable this Israel, this nation, to return back to normality as soon as possible. And we want to do the best what we can to help in that.
Amen.
It's a privilege for us.
Mazal tov. So we opened this house less than a month ago. We have an agreement with the Ministry of Defense, and we see many people that came from that field, from post-traumatic syndromes. Sometimes it's from recent time, from that war, and sometimes it's from different wars. That war is just resonated and brings it back to life sometimes. We see people in high level of anxiety. Something starts going wrong. They start having some post-traumatic symptoms. Psychoeducation is also part of it, to normalize it, to normalize what's happening, and to build the progress together, to explain how we treat with that, how we treat with post-trauma syndrome, and helps them to believe that they have the force to pass it. I feel blessed, and to know the Christian embassy, and to be able to see how many amazing things you're doing around the world. I feel that you are solid ground in a very shaky time for Israel in general. For me as Israeli citizens, for me as a Jewish, you are very solid ground for us. And I want to thank you a lot.
After Hamas brutally attacked Israel on October the 7th, 2023, the ICEJ has been actively standing with Israel and her people through advocacy and urgently needed aid projects. Now is the time for Christians to turn their love for Israel and the Jewish people into real action as never before. Your donation will help deliver bomb shelters to at-risk areas, provide necessary supplies for first responders, care for evacuees with food, shelter, clothing, and trauma care, and will eventually help rebuild these devastated communities. Visit ICEJUSA.tv to donate online or call 1-800-910-6355 and give your generous gift today.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Robert.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.